Hi, I'm Adam in Wales and this is my board gaming vlog, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about a few things that I've been up to. So I'm not focusing in on one particular area, although I'm sure I'll end up talking quite a lot about the Games Workshop Fantasy Flight split that has recently happened. But that's not where we're going to start. To begin with, I thought I'd just give you an update on what I've been up to, and largely that has been making prototypes, preparing for Essen, contacting publishers, going through that whole process of trying to get my designs in front of the right people so that hopefully some of them get made. Essen Spiel is coming up in the next sort of 6 weeks or so. This is the largest board game convention in the world. Perhaps only rivaled by Gen Con in America. But here, publishers from all around the world congregate, and this is one place where I can, for that 4 days only, where I can really get to show what I've done over the year to these various publishers and hopefully then get stuff made. So I've been making dice, placing stickers on dice, hundreds of these dice sat in front of the telly, sticking on, piling them up. I've been cutting cards, and that's not even to mention all the emails and the communication back and forth with various publishers trying to set up these meetings. It's an exciting time for me. This is my favourite bit of the year, that 4 days in Essen. It is so busy, so hectic, so tiring, but really exciting with lots of highs and lows as people tell you they love your games or people tell you they hate your games. So I've been doing a lot of that, but I have also had some time to play some games, and I thought I'd show you one that was a particular highlight and a bit of a surprise to me. So recently in a maths trade I picked up the game Adventureland. In Adventureland, players control a team of adventurers moving across the board, collecting swords, companions, herbs, gold, and fighting fog monsters. The gameplay is extremely simple. On a player's turn, they turn over 2 cards which tell them to place items onto certain spots on the grid, and then they move twice. When an adventurer moves, it can move as far as it likes in a horizontal or a vertical direction, but it can never go back again, so moves to the right and down the board are allowed, but you can never move left or up. 3 different scenarios dictate what you're trying to achieve, but generally you get points for collecting stuff and/or for having majority presence in a city region. When you face a fog monster, you add up your number of adventurers and companions on that space, you add points from herbs, spend swords to roll dice and add their results to your total, and spend gold to gain rerolls. Monsters give you lots of points, but they also block movement, so they can limit access to the cities and other high-scoring locations. So sometimes killing a monster might just let your opponent sneak into a better position. When all companions and swords have been used, the game ends and the highest points wins. The reason I say this was a surprise is because it's from HABA. Now, I was aware of this game last year at Essen Spiel when it was first released. This game, along with the game Karuba, were sort of new games in a mid-weight, well, they're still pretty light, but a fantasy-style game that is intended for families, a sort of strategy game, as opposed to the little yellow box games that HABA normally does. Let me just grab you one to show you what I mean. So HABA is known... Oh dear, I've dropped a lot there. HABA is known for little games in yellow boxes like this one, Super Rhino, where we're stacking up the cards, often dexterity games, games with big dice that you roll, lots of tactile pieces, brilliant games for very young children. But now they've released some strategy games, and Adventureland was one of the first. Adventureland is designed by Wolfgang Kramer and Michael Kiesling, who are 2 of the best designers in the sort of board gaming world, really, and they've been around ever since this Euro craze started. They were designing in the late 80s, the 90s. They were some of the key innovators in here. That scoring track around the edge of the board, that's the Kramer track, the Wolfgang Kramer track. These guys had a big influence, and yet they're still creating games, and it's great to see them creating a little sort of a family game like this and still having brilliant mechanisms that I've not really seen before. I played Adventureland and I didn't think it was the greatest game in the whole world, but I thought it was really good. And it didn't feel like anything else I'd ever played. And that's quite rare to me, because I've played a lot of games and often they borrow mechanics from each other and they combine them in different ways. But this brilliant movement mechanism where I can go forwards and I can never go back again. Yeah, it's similar to something like Takedo or something like that, but here we're working in a horizontal and a vertical axis. We're picking up stuff as we go. We can never go back. It's really, really good as a mechanism, and the game it was much more enjoyable to play than it had sounded. As I say, I picked this up in a trade. I probably wouldn't have purchased it, but I can certainly recommend that other people do. The fact that it has those 3 nice adventures in it means that you can play it at different difficulty levels. Yeah, it's a good one, Adventureland, a nice surprise. So the big news that came last week was that Fantasy Flight Games, now Asmodee North America, has split from Games Workshop. Now those two companies had a sort of an agreement whereby Fantasy Flight could publish games set in the Games Workshop universe. Now Games Workshop has historically been quite an independent sort of company. They've tended to do their own thing, and working with other companies hasn't always sat easily with them, I don't think. Added to that is the sort of long history of Games Workshop, where they used to create a lot of board games and not just miniatures games. Now, I was introduced to Games Workshop when I was 11 or 12 years old, I guess, maybe slightly younger. Perhaps one of the first was, it may have been the first that I played, was Hero Quest, which was an MB Games, Milton Bradley, so a mass market sort of thing that was co-designed and co-published, I suppose, with Games Workshop, with an agreement that they could use that license, and Games Workshop produced the miniatures. Fantastic game. But I also discovered that sort of range of games. At the time, it was in the back of little bookshops. There weren't Games Workshop stores all over the place. So I have the game Rogue Trooper, which is basically a big board game with lots of pieces, very similar to something that Fantasy Flight would do now, albeit with lower production standards. I never really got on particularly well with Rogue Trooper, but I was a huge fan of Dungeon Quest. Dungeon Quest always seemed brilliant to me. Dungeon Quest, later produced by Fantasy Flight. And I also played a lot of Talisman, again, later produced by Fantasy Flight. I was playing Mighty Empires, Advanced Hero Quest, and several others. A big one that was a major, a big part of my teenage years was playing the game Blood Bowl, this game of fantasy football. Blood Bowl is due to be re-released by Games Workshop at some point over the next year or so. I'm just quickly going to show you how Blood Bowl works. In Blood Bowl, each player controls a team of fantasy monsters playing a match of ultra-violent fantasy football. Each player in the team has their own unique set of statistics: movement, strength, agility, armour value, and on your turn you have 4 minutes to complete all of your actions. Each player on the team can take one action. They can move or attack another player, this is called a block, or they can move and throw the ball. One player per turn can combine a move and a block into a move called a blitz. If a player moves adjacent to an opponent, the opponent can attempt to tackle them. And your turn ends immediately if one of your own players is knocked down or if you drop the ball. Success or failure in all actions except movement is determined by dice rolls, and the number of dice rolled is dependent on your player's statistics and other modifiers. Hence, weaker players are less likely to make a successful attack, and poor agility makes it harder to throw or catch the ball, as does throwing over longer distances. Many additional rules cover all edge cases such as injuries and fouls, throw-ins, reserves, even cheerleaders and weather changes. Ultimately, though, players are trying to score touchdowns by getting the ball into the opponent's end zone. Of course, having played Blood Bowl as a teenager, I was looking for sort of expansion material, so I ended up with Dungeon Bowl, which was a sort of alternate standalone game where set in a dungeon, so you're throwing the ball, bouncing it off walls, additional things can happen, but essentially the same game as Blood Bowl, and this time with elves and dwarves, where Blood Bowl had humans and orcs. But you could buy all these different teams and throw them all in. They all work together. So in that clip I showed you, you could see dwarves playing against elves, but equally I've got teams of dark elves and skeletons and vampires and all sorts of different teams in various stages of bad sort of childhood painting and breakages and all the rest of it. So when the new Blood Bowl comes out, I'm going to have to do a lot of repair work, I think, on my old Blood Bowl sets. But I've hung on to that stuff because that game was so rich and so immersive. And it had a story and it had characters. You had these star players. So anyway, thematic American-style gaming, albeit this was a British company. This was the formative years of my board gaming, really. Which is strange, because when I rediscovered board gaming in my sort of late 20s, early 30s, I went in that same route. I started to play a little bit of Warhammer 40k, and I found it not a great fit for me. It was the heavy flavour text, lots of long passages of text that were about the story that didn't really have anything to do with the game, that tended to make these rule books bloat, and I found it all quite difficult to follow and difficult to get into. Not to mention the deeply competitive sort of games and the people I found to play it with, they were very, very competitive too. It was a very sort of male sort of competitive environment, lots of banter, which basically meant lots of making fun of each other, sometimes in really quite sort of unpleasant and derogatory ways. There were lots of lovely people I played with, don't get me wrong, but I found it quite an uncomfortable sort of fit for me. And so the natural progression, some of those people were starting to play games by Fantasy Flight, because Fantasy Flight was producing these American-style games too, with lots of theme. So I got caught up in games of Battlestar Galactica and Mansions of Madness. It's a miracle I ever continued playing board games at all, because those were some of my worst board gaming experiences. Really long games, really, really long. Loads of that flavour text stuff sort of getting in the way. I didn't really understand what was going on. I didn't know the Battlestar Galactica license. I'd never seen a TV programme. I didn't know anything about Cthulhu. And really, I wasn't enjoying these games very much. Then I found the Eurogame side of things, and I got caught up in that. Since then, I've tried to stay away from Fantasy Flight games a little bit. Not because I think they're bad. I think they're very, very good, and I've got lots of friends who love them. But it's not my style. The one game that I did, I mean, I've got Eurogames behind me. I'm well aware that Kingsburg is a Fantasy Flight game, and that they've recently re-released games like Tigris and Euphrates and Samurai and stuff. So I know that there is a Euro line of games that they cover, and I like those games very much. But I've got on rather well with Imperial Assault, and it's because the theme I'm quite connected to that Star Wars theme. I'm not deep into it, but you know, I loved the films as a child, and so I can kind of I can enjoy a little bit of that flavour a bit more than I can with other games. So Imperial Assault has been a good one. Now, where's this all going? Well, that's split. So what's happened between Games Workshop and Fantasy Flight? There's been lots of speculation, lots of blame and all this sort of stuff going on. Who was the bad guy in this split? And all this has been discussed on forums across the internet, of course. You know, and the truth is, none of us know. These are very secretive companies. They don't tell us very much. They don't tell anybody anything very much. Even the most prominent sort of reviewers don't seem to know very much about the inner workings of Games Workshop and Fantasy Flight and Asmodee. So the sort of speculation seems to be, has Games Workshop decided it's had enough? Has Games Workshop moved on? Is this because of the Rune Wars miniatures game that Fantasy Flight has obviously been developing for a while that could compete with their own line of miniatures games? Or is this about Asmodee North America? Have they put new stipulations on that contract? Have they decided they don't need Games Workshop anymore? Or have Games Workshop priced themselves out of that agreement? Have they said this is how much the license is worth? Or has Games Workshop decided it wants to start making board games itself? Over the last year, we've started to see a bit more of that going on. There's all manner of different things being thrown around about what could have happened. And the long and short of it is it doesn't really matter. Ultimately, these are two companies that have grown and developed, and that arrangement has been in place for 8 or 9 years now. And it seems that it's time for those companies to move on and develop. Now, that is going to be a good thing in the future for new development of games, I'm sure of it. Games Workshop is capable of producing very, very good games in a particular style, and Fantasy Flight has their style as well, and a huge following too. What it does mean is, what's going to happen to those games that are shared between the two companies? So we have Talisman and Dungeon Quest and Fury of Dracula, which are originally Games Workshop games, and no doubt those rights will revert back to Games Workshop, and I wouldn't be surprised to see similar games or the same games come out from Games Workshop in the future. But what about the other games, the games that were developed by Fantasy Flight, just using the license? How are we ever going to see Chaos in the Old World again? I don't care about that, I didn't enjoy it very much. But how are we going to see games like Forbidden Stars and the Warhammer Quest Adventure card game? Have those games gone forever? I suspect they may have done, or certainly for the foreseeable future. We've seen wrangling over the rights to the game back to old Hero Quest over recent years, and other companies trying to pick it up and make sort of tribute games and use the title. This game has complicated copyright issues, being partly MB, partly Games Workshop. You know, where exactly does this belong? MB is now a part of Hasbro, and there's a role-playing game called Hero Quest. It gets complicated. Whether we'll ever see a reprint of Hero Quest, it seems unlikely at this point. So what does that mean for Fantasy Flight and Games Workshop? Well, it means if you want a copy of those games, grab them now, and it may already be too late, just a few days down the line. The prices have gone up, they've become out of stock. I quickly grabbed a copy of Blood Bowl Team Manager, the card game. Not really knowing, will I enjoy this or not? I don't know, but I bought the 2 expansions as well. I went a little bit overboard because I thought I may not be able to get this ever again. And I love the Blood Bowl theme. I love the characters. The characters have stayed the same. You know, we're talking now getting on for 30 years of Blood Bowl, and still you've got Morgenthau and Jordan Freshbreeze and, you know, the Riekland Reavers and the Dwarf Giants. You know, everything stayed the same. The story is still there. And these feel like characters from my childhood, like sort of almost cartoon characters and characters from books that I enjoyed as a child. The characters from Blood Bowl I put in that same sort of category. I was cautious going into Blood Bowl Team Manager because I didn't know whether it was realistically a game I was going to enjoy on the basis of the other sort of Fantasy Flight type games, where, and certainly looking at the rulebook, I found it quite intimidating to pick up and start to play. In Blood Bowl Team Manager, each person controls a unique team of monsters engaged in a series of American football-style matches, just with far more violence and cheating. On your turn, you place a player from your team adjacent to one of the available matches. The player will have various skills. They might take the ball, they might allow you to draw a new card into your hand, they might tackle an opposing player, here you roll dice to determine success or failure, or they might cheat. In this instance, you add a cheating token to their card, which may be worth points at the end of the match, or it might just get you sent off. Players also have special abilities, which means each team plays very differently, whether that's the orcs, or the rat-like Skaven, or the humans, the dwarves, the elves, or the chaos monsters. When all players have played their hand of cards, the matches are all resolved, and the player who has the most points at each match gains rewards. They might get fans, or better players, or new special abilities. After 5 complete rounds of play, the player with the most fans wins the game. So the long and short of it is I've played 1 game of Blood Bowl Team Manager. I haven't played enough to review it properly or anything like that, but I really enjoyed it. It was very, very random, very chaotic. Lots of fun though, and I really enjoyed playing those characters, putting them down, seeing what they could do and how the different teams worked and how their different, you know, their different races affected their different abilities. It was great. It would be a real shame if Blood Bowl Team Manager doesn't come back. Now, I don't see how it can. Fantasy Flight could retheme it, but it's already very, very similar to the game Smash Up that is a big hit at the moment. So I can't see any real benefit to them retheming Blood Bowl Team Manager when Smash Up is already out there covering the same sort of game mechanisms. And Games Workshop presumably won't have the rights to the game's mechanisms to release it themselves. So I think this one may actually be lost. This is I talked about this a lot in my previous video about the future of the board game industry. And what we've seen recently is a lot of reprints, a lot of things coming back. But as these companies grow, it certainly feels to me like there is the potential for some of these games to get shoved to one side as new stuff is focused on. Partly through the will of the companies, but partly through issues like this, copyright issues, licensing issues. So it will be very interesting to see. But I'm glad I've got that Blood Bowl team manager. That feels like, yeah, I snapped that up just at the right time. And maybe that's one you can still get hold of, because it's been around for a long time now. It hasn't got the buzz of something like Forbidden Stars, which, you know, realistically, you're unlikely to get hold of a copy of that now, I would think, unless you can find it in the back of a little local game store. Anyway, I've been rambling on about that. I haven't actually told you very much because I don't know what's going on with those companies. But it's been an interesting week. Certainly take a look at Adventureland. Soon I'll be talking about my favourite games, or the things that I'm looking forward to most from that Essen Spiel sort of preview list on the Board Game Geek website. I know a lot of other reviewers have been doing that, but I've been holding off a little bit. Partly I quite like to turn up and just see what's there, you know, in between my various meetings with publishers. I'm sure I'll have a lot to update you on over the coming weeks. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the vlog. I'm Adam in Wales on Board Game Geek. I'm Adam78. Please subscribe to my channel. Follow me on Twitter @BoardGameWales. And I'll see you again on the next vlog. Thank you very much for watching. All the best.